The air hung thick and wet, a suffocating blanket of humidity that had long ago ceased to bother me. I'd spent 40 years breathing this swamp, feeling its damp embrace, listening to the drip of stagnant water from cypress knees and the buzz of a million unseen insects. My cabin, a leaning shack on stilts, was just another organic part of the bayou, slowly dissolving back into the muck from which it was built. I was Silas, and the swamp was my blood. I knew every gator hole, every winding slough, every whisper of wind through the Spanish moss. Old legends, ghost lights, and half-formed spirits, just the bayou playing tricks on the uninitiated. Or, maybe, I used to think, the swamp gas getting to their heads. It started subtly, a ghost of a thing on the wind. I was poling my flat-bottomed skiff through a narrow channel, heading for a line of traps I'd set near the Whispering Islands, when it hit me. Not a smell, not at first, but more like a memory of a smell. Something ancient and cloying, a sweetness that tasted of decay, but not the familiar decay of rotting leaves or a dead possum. This was different, deeper. It made the hairs on my arms prickle, an unfamiliar sensation in a place where I felt nothing but a dull, accustomed awareness. I sniffed the air, turning my head slowly, but the scent vanished as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed by the usual swampy musk. I dismissed it, of course. Just a strange current of air, a trick of the nose, maybe a patch of some rare, dying flower I'd never encountered. I had seen plenty of strange things in my time out here, but nothing I couldn't explain away with enough logic and a healthy dose of cynicism. But the scent returned. The next day, as I was mending a tear in my fishing net, a heavier, more insistent presence on the humid air. It was a dark, earthy sweetness, like loam mixed with something sickly rich, almost syrupy. And underneath it, a metallic tang, like old blood. It filled my nostrils, coating the back of my throat. I stood up, my old bones creaking, and walked to the edge of my porch, peering out into the green-gray haze that always clung to the swamp. Nothing. Just the endless, monotonous curtain of cypress trees and hanging moss. Yet the scent clung to me, even after I stepped back inside. It was in my clothes, on my skin, leaching into the very wood of my cabin. I found myself drawn to it, a moth to a flickering, poisonous flame. It was stronger down the serpent's coil, a stretch of bayou I usually avoided. The water there was unusually dark, almost black, and the cypress trees grew so close together their branches intertwined, forming a suffocating canopy. It was always cooler there, and unnervingly quiet, the usual symphony of insects and frog calls muted to a distant hum. As I pulled deeper, the scent intensified, becoming almost intoxicating. It wasn't pleasant, not exactly, but it was compelling. My mind felt clearer somehow, yet also clouded. The air shimmered, not from heat haze, but from something else, something I couldn't quite grasp. And then I started seeing them. Shadows at first, just fleeting shapes in the murky water, distortions caused by the shifting light or the sway of the boat. But then they solidified, becoming more defined. Figures. Tall, elongated forms, their limbs impossibly long, their bodies shimmering like heat over asphalt. They were graceful, fluid, moving just beneath the surface, their movements mimicking the slow, sinuous sway of the waterweeds. They had no faces, no distinguishing features, just vague, indistinct outlines that were somehow more terrifying for their lack of detail. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes with the back of my hand. The figures vanished, leaving only the dark water. Swamp gas, I told myself, lack of sleep, my imagination playing tricks. But my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching silence. The scent was a suffocating shroud now, thick enough to taste. It was sweet, yes, but also deeply, profoundly unsettling. It reminded me of something forgotten, something ancient and hungry. The whispers began then, soft and insidious, carried on the currents of the humid air. They weren't words, not really, more like a chorus of sighs, a long, drawn-out exhalation that seemed to come from the very air itself, from the water, from the dark heart of the cypress trees. It was a mournful sound, yet laced with an almost joyful anticipation. It wound around me, pressing in, making my ears ache. It spoke of hunger, a vast, primal emptiness that echoed my own burgeoning dread. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes with the back of my hand. The figures vanished, leaving only the dark water. Swamp gas, I told myself, lack of sleep, my imagination playing tricks. But my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching silence. The scent was a suffocating shroud now, thick enough to taste. It was sweet, yes, but also deeply, profoundly unsettling. It reminded me of something forgotten, something ancient and hungry. The whispers began then, soft and insidious, carried on the currents of the humid air. They weren't words, not really, more like a chorus of sighs, a long, drawn-out exhalation that seemed to come from the very air itself, from the water, from the dark heart of the cypress trees. It was a mournful sound, yet laced with an almost joyful anticipation. It wound around me, pressing in, making my ears ache. It spoke of hunger, a vast, primal emptiness that echoed my own burgeoning dread. I tried to turn back. My hands, calloused and strong, gripped the pole, attempting to push the skiff around. But the current, which had been barely noticeable before, seemed to strengthen, gently but firmly pulling me forward, deeper into the serpent's coil. It was as if the swamp itself had a will, a purpose, and that purpose was me. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my stubborn self-control. I was Silas. I knew this swamp. Nothing scared me here. But the scent, the visions, the whispers, they were an invasion, a violation of my long-held dominion. The shadows in the water returned, closer now. They moved with a disturbing intelligence, circling my skiff, their indistinct forms shifting and reforming. They seemed to watch me, though they had no eyes. They were the embodiment of the swamp's unseen forces, a hungry, ancient consciousness that was finally revealing itself. One of them, larger than the rest, rose partially from the water, its form stretching impossibly tall. It wasn't a human shape, not precisely. More like a column of churning mist, vaguely humanoid, but twisted, elongated, distorted. The scent pulsed around it, stronger than ever, a wave of sickly, sweet decay that made my stomach churn. I could feel its gaze, though there were no eyes to meet. It was a gaze of profound, ageless hunger. My mind started to fray at the edges. The lines between what was real and what was born of the swamp's insidious influence blurred. I saw my cabin, rotting and abandoned, half submerged in the murky water. I saw my own reflection in the water, but it wasn't my face staring back. It was a younger me, a boy with wide, terrified eyes, before the swamp had hardened him. The whispers became louder, more distinct, coalescing into a single, insistent drone that resonated deep within my bones. Come, nourish, join. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, what the scent was. It was the scent of the swamp's true nature, its insatiable appetite. It wasn't just water and trees and gators. It was something else, something far older, a vast, living entity that had been slumbering, feeding subtly for centuries, and now it was waking up. and it was hungry for me. My breath hitched. My throat was dry, burning. The air was so thick with the cloying sweetness, it felt like I was breathing liquid. My vision swam, the cypress trees twisting into grotesque shapes, their Spanish moss transforming into grasping tendrils. The figures in the water, once shadowy, were now almost solid, their forms coalescing, beckoning. They weren't just reflections or apparitions. They were extensions of the swamp itself, its insidious tendrils reaching for me. My strength began to wane. My arms, once powerful, trembled as I tried to resist the current, tried to turn my skiff against the swamp's pull. But it was useless. I was caught, ensnared by something far larger and older than myself. The whispers were no longer just in my ears. They were inside my head, echoing, resonating, eroding my will. They promised an end to the fear, a release, a becoming. The large, amorphous shape in the water slowly, impossibly, extended a pseudopod towards my boat. It was not solid, but made of the same shifting mist and dark water, laced with that sickeningly sweet, ancient scent. It reached for my hand, not violently, but with a slow, deliberate purpose that spoke of patient, inescapable hunger. I dropped the poling stick. It fell into the dark water with a soft thump, a sound swallowed by the overwhelming silence. My body felt heavy, unyielding, as if the swamp had already begun to claim me. My eyes were wide, fixed on the approaching tendril, a tendril that carried the full, devastating weight of the forgotten scent. It was the scent of dissolution, of becoming part of the vast, consuming maw of the swamp. It was the smell of my own unraveling. The tendril touched my hand. It wasn't cold, as I expected, but oddly warm, a deep, pervasive heat that spread through my veins. The whispers intensified, becoming a triumphant chorus within my skull. The figures in the water pressed closer, their indistinct forms seeming to absorb the light around them. My eyes drifted to the surface of the water, now teeming with shifting, phantom shapes. I saw 1,000 faces, indistinct and fleeting, rising and sinking, faces that were and were not. They were the faces of those who had come before, drawn by the same inescapable allure, consumed by the same ancient hunger. And I knew, with a chilling certainty that pierced through the haze of the scent, that my own face would soon join theirs. The swamp had called, and I, Silas, the cynical trapper who feared nothing, was answering. The forgotten scent had finally found its home.